Hi, I'm Jenny, and today I want to talk to you about what is your brand for your private practice. So this is kind of the most basic question, in my opinion, uh, when it comes to starting to think about marketing your practice. So you've thought through some of those startup questions about, the kind of practice you want to have, and now is the step, the dreaded marketing step of how do we get started finding those clients for our practice. Um, I want to start this with the caveat that I am not a marketer by training. I have no expertise in this. I have learned completely flying by the seat of my pants, watching every, reading every blog, watching every free webinar I could get my hands on to learn how to do this well. I've learned definitely a lot of things that have worked well, and I've also learned a lot of things that were a waste of time. So this is just my experience in marketing private practice. But the first question that we start with is, what is your brand? So your brand can be defined in a number of ways. Some definitions that I've found are how the company differentiates itself from its peers. So how would your practice be different, be distinct from any other given practice? Maybe be different from a hospital experience or from a clinic experience or from a practice that otherwise looks very similar right down the road. So what makes you different? Um, it's been defined as the personality of the company, which is kind of a weird high level concept. A lot of it, especially when you're starting out, and especially if you're a solo practice, will tie into what's your personality. So I've mentioned in previous videos that I tend to be very laid back in my approach. I tend to love incorporating humor. Those are pieces of my personality, but they are also pieces that are intentionally integrated into my brand for my business. My business is not going to look um, overly serious in a lot of our materials, in our handouts. Of course, there are certain things that may lean more one way or another, just depending on, legislative requirements or whatever. But externally, the personality of my company tends to be more laid back and casual because that's where I put the emphasis. Um, your brand helps people identify the particular company or the individual. So some of your brand and what people often think of are symbols or logos, those kind of things that tie into our brand. That's some of the most obvious piece. So let's start there. Your logo. This is a fun step. Well, it's fun for me because I'm artsy. That's part of um, what I enjoy, which is also why I create these videos, even though as you can tell, there's not great production quality. I really enjoy the creating element of it. A logo is a symbol. It can be the way that you write things. It can be um, communicated through different fonts. If you look up in that corner, that is part of the brand that I'm creating, even just for this channel, even on a, low scale feature, having an image that somewhat represents you can be important. It can communicate without words something that you want to communicate to your potential audience. So if you look at what's just in the corner on the image I'm showing you, you can see that there's kind of artsy writing there. There's a mix of writings. There's colors behind it. Colors can be an important part of your brand and they can communicate certain things. Those of you who know any organizational psychology know that there's certain colors that communicate different things. Things like the color red tends to prompt people to more action. So that there's a fun little free marketing tip for you. If you have a call to action, if you want someone to take a step to make a phone call, one little trick is to integrate red into the visuals you're putting in front of your potential customer. Colors like what you see on my screen tend to be calming. And so it's a popular choice for a lot of therapy-like practices. You might choose more out there colors if you want to be more artsy. You might think even about things like your personal style and the way you present yourself. So you can see, obviously, my hair is not a very typical color. And honestly, I wanted to have funky hair for a long time before I actually got brave enough to do it. For the longest time, I was concerned that clients would be put off by having funky colored hair. When I finally took the leap, my clients either didn't care or thought it was cool. And especially my teen clients, it gave me some good street cred. So, keeping in mind that the more authentic you are with how you represent your brand, the more it's going to resonate not only for you, but potentially for your ideal clients as well. So, think about your style as well as a piece of that brand. Um, as you're developing things like the logo, like the colors, those kind of things, one of the things that's very important, besides checking it out, like how well it resonates for you, because again, that's going to fit better with your personality and also attract more ideal clients for you, it's really important to get honest feedback. I said honest feedback there, not just affirming feedback. We're not talking about taking it to your mom and your best friends who are going to say, "Oh, that logo looks so pretty. I'm so proud of you. That looks great." That's lovely, but we want to present a few options and get feedback about which ones resonate more for which people and why or why not. When you're thinking about making a logo, if you are not independently super artistic and have some graphic design training, you might want to consider hiring that out. You can still use your own ideas. You can hire someone who can bring to life your ideas. Your logo can be as simple as your name. It could be as simple as your company name. It could be the name and a tagline, which a tagline is kind of the follow-up line for just a little more hinting into your mission or like what you do to help people understand and connect with the logo. You could hire a designer, a graphic designer, to create your logo. There are also lots of really inexpensive, even free options out there these days to get a logo designed for next to nothing. You can look at Fiverr online. They have a bunch of different professionals in different trades who will bid for your business. So you can have people provide sketches of logos and you can move forward with someone that you really like. There's Vistaprint. If you don't even want to deal with professionals, you just want to have something drafted for you, you could consider that. Or if you want a little more hands-on approach, there's also stuff like Canva, where even with the unpaid version, there are a lot of options to really look through their different templates, tweak them to be a little more of what feels you, change the font, change the colors, etc. But keep in mind this logo represents you, and it's one of those things that will stand out and look like your stamp on something. Part of brand, that term was used and still is used with livestock. When you think of, cows in the field, how do the farmers know which cows go where? If one of them goes missing and they get found randomly, how do they get returned where they belong? Well, they're branded. They are marked with essentially the logo of the person who owns them. So it's clear to everyone around, this belongs here. This belongs with this company, with this family, with this business. The same way your logo marks your materials. It could mark your paperwork. It's a great way to keep it consistent. It could mark your office space. It can mark your business cards. So it really creates associations for the people you work with. But again, honest feedback is really critical. So some fun stories. I had a colleague ask for feedback on their logo, and they had a few different options. Now, this colleague really leans into cultural diversity. It's kind of their sweet spot, where they are really kind of an expert in that area, and that's the kind of client they love working with. So that's what they wanted to represent with their logo. Now, one of the options did not resonate for me the way the other ones did, because this particular option had sort of a symbol that represented the world, but it kind of represented the world with like the longitudinal, latitudinal lines. You can kind of picture what I'm talking about. And when I looked at it, my first gut reaction was thinking tech. It read like internet, technological something. Now, just the fact that I had that gut reaction is constructive feedback because this person in no way is trying to communicate anything tech related. And so, especially if they get that feedback from multiple people, I would discourage them from using that kind of image because it's not conveying quite the brand they're looking for. Um, yeah, so that's one example. I've also seen and heard stories about potential logos being put forward where um, an outside observer who hasn't been looking at it the same way you have might come back with feedback like, yeah, I'm kind of seeing boobs, you know, and we chuckle and we laugh, but really there's a lot that goes on unconsciously for consumers or people seeing our materials. And there's certain messages we don't want them to see. We want it to really resonate, but also to speak what we're hoping it will speak to them. So honest feedback is really important. Getting multiple options is really important so that you can really find the one that communicates what you want to communicate, even if the potential, your reviewers can't put it into words. They're like, oh, that one feels a little intense to me. I'm not sure why, but it just does. Well, let's try to figure that out. Let's try to tweak it so that it feels the way we want it to feel. Your tagline I mentioned briefly is kind of that little description of just in a short sentence, maybe not even a full sentence, what does your company do? There are lots of great taglines out there, and some of them are particularly memorable, which is what we want, right? Because if your clients remember that, they're remembering an important part of you and your company. Some of the pieces that also go into branding are your tone of your marketing materials. So think about this in terms of that personality piece, right? Like, are you a laid back practice? Are you a practice that integrates humor? That can very much come through in your marketing materials. Are you a more serious professional agency? Nothing wrong with that. It doesn't resonate for me personally, but there's definitely a need for that. And there's people looking for that kind of company, and your marketing materials can speak to your level of professionalism, you know, the serious nature of the work that you're doing. And that might be perfect for some people. Your brand, as I mentioned, can communicate your style, but also your office culture. So it's easier to think about style in terms of a solo practice, but even with a group practice, when you're putting together different types of personalities, you're going to tend to attract similar types of therapists. And even with a mix of style, there still might be elements that are kind of cohesive throughout the company culture. So even though there might be some people on my team who might be a little more straight-laced or a little more, directive or structured in their therapy approach, there's still maybe some interweaving threads of, a client-focused approach, being extra compassionate, those kind of things that tie into our culture and ultimately into our brand. When you are thinking about your brand and all of the different details that go into it, also keep in mind your target audience. If, for example, you are putting together a private practice that is specifically geared to children, you might have a very different marketing approach. You might choose different colors. You might choose more primary colors or more childlike fonts because that is what's going to resonate for the population that's your core focus. Now, even though another interesting thing, if you're marketing to kids or teens, you're really probably targeting their parents, not the kids themselves. However, their parents are going to have certain associations when they see things like big, bold primary colors or childlike fonts or childlike images that speak of, you're probably picturing in your head right now a bunch of like primary education stuff and daycare advertisings. There's similarities there for a reason because they are heavily associated by the general public with the types of companies they are representing. So if you have a particular target audience or niche, it's important to keep that in mind as you're thinking about your brand. Even things like if you're working with a specialized population like military families, I probably wouldn't recommend something like, I can't do this, artsy. Something artsy like this might not resonate as well with people coming out of military culture. Or if I were targeting men specifically with this kind of marketing, I probably wouldn't go for this because this kind of speaks to, I don't know, a range of it, more so women, and more so like your target going women, maybe your artsy type women, but keeping in mind like who in general tends to gravitate towards these kind of images, these kind of pictures. Keep that in mind. It's not necessarily going to discourage people who aren't exactly in that target audience, but there's a lot of like strategy and thinking when it comes to who is this really going to appeal to and how is it going to communicate who we are. So the last piece that I heard that I really like was your brand represents you and your promise to your customers. Now, even though we don't usually think of our clients as customers, to some extent they are, right? They get to choose us just like we get to choose if we're a good fit for them. So thinking about your brand, think about what represents you and what represents what you bring to the table for the people who might choose to use your services. So I hope this has got you thinking. I would challenge you to start thinking about colors and images, and maybe even just start with one of the options for developing a logo as you're thinking about branding, because the more consistent it can be in your future marketing materials, the more cohesive your marketing will be, and the more it will help your potential clients to really find you and associate the things that you want them to associate with you and your company and who you are. So